Friends, how are you? Welcome to Changing Tracks. Today we have Michelle with us. Michelle, how are you? You're very welcome to our show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Christina, so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your family background? What was your relationship with the Lord like when you were growing up?
I grew up in South Florida. I have 3 brothers, 1 older and 2 younger. And growing up, we were raised in the Catholic faith by going to Catholic school, but it wasn't necessarily something practiced at home. My mom was the one that really helped us go to Mass and helped us to try to get involved, but for me personally, I never really took to it when I was younger. And into middle school, I remember making some concrete decisions that the faith wasn't something relevant for my life, that the things that I learned when I was younger, I didn't feel like they could actually be something that helped me or that they were real. It was kind of like something I would learn at school and then come home and put on the shelf, and like another subject that I would be learning but not something that could be applied to my life. So I remember that being just distant. My understanding of who God was not something that interested me. Other things like soccer and modeling and sports and things that I was involved in really took my time and attention.
In your adolescence, which is usually a difficult time, would you say that you went off the deep end? Was there something specific that caused you to go off track in your relationship with God?
I would say by the time I was in 8th grade in middle school, I've made some concrete decisions kind of in my mind and heart of what my life was going to look like. And that was definitely something that didn't involve God as part of it. I was very involved in soccer at that time and kind of like sold my soul for soccer and training and wanted to be like the next Mia Hamm, the most all-star player. And my older brother and I shared a great love and passion for soccer. And we did everything and anything to become better and to really play and compete. And then at the same time, I was doing modeling since I was about in 3rd grade. And so both of those things really had my attention as well as my identity at that time. Both of those things can be good if they're in balance, but for me, they really took on kind of who I was and where I valued myself on how I performed in both those areas. And God wasn't really a big part of that picture. I kind of thought I could pay my own way and make my own life and make myself to be someone. And I really took on the identity of those things, not only in soccer, but also modeling and just what I saw in the magazines, and the woman I wanted to become was successful in those areas. So based on like how I looked and how I performed was really important to me at that time, which fell short when later on in life, those things weren't something that were possible anymore.
So what was life like for you at that time? I mean, living in those 2 areas of sport and modeling, were you happy in your day-to-day life?
So at that time, soccer and modeling were both something that really took my identity and what I placed my value in, and that was in 8th grade. And then also around 8th grade is when I started getting involved in the partying and just kind of the scene of South Florida. And like I said before, I have an older brother, and so we shared kind of our social life together. And so I was hanging out with people that were much older than me and getting involved in things at a very young age that weren't the best, weren't healthy for me. But at that point, I thought I was invisible and I could do anything, and thought I was way older than I was, and really kind of got trapped in some in sin that brought about some destruction slowly and surely in those areas. And then when I was in 9th grade, when I went to high school, I had those dreams of modeling and soccer being something that would be the lead of my life and like what I would be successful in. And when I was midway through my freshman year of high school, I got very sick with an immune disease, kind of out of the blue, and I was undiagnosed for a while. And for those next 2 years, I was in and out of bed with this illness. And it was a time of life where, great kind of a tragedy really happened like in my life, where things that I loved, the soccer that I thought was my career as well as modeling, weren't possible. And had really a lot of problems with friends at that time and family. I was just at a place of real confusion, and the things I placed value in were lost, and so I didn't think my life had much value. And at the same time, immersed myself even more into the partying and the things when I did feel well, because I thought that would make me feel better, and it kind of numbed out some of the pain and the heartache that was going on at the time from the loss of the activity that I was involved in. So for those 2 years, I really wrestled with myself, and I had one moment in the beginning where a close friend of ours in our group of friends passed away. He was hit by a drunk driver. And really that, looking back, it was kind of the Lord I think was trying to use that to call me back to him, but I was very shallow in my faith and understanding things. And I remember I prayed like the one night that he got in an accident, was like, well, you know, God, if you exist, don't let him die. And the next day he passed away. And to me, I didn't understand things. So I was like, well, you're a jerk then. Like, I prayed to you once and you don't listen to me. And looking back, it's hard not to laugh. But at the time, like I was like, okay, I'm trying. Like, hear God, hear my prayer. And you know, in hindsight, the Lord was up to a much bigger picture than I could have imagined at that time. But for me, that was my one try, and then I was like, fine. If God does exist, then he doesn't care about me and he's not listening. And I really didn't think God was like personally involved in my life. It was more like, this power out here, if you're available and hear me, this is my prayer. And after that, I just kind of turned into a lot of self-destructive behaviors and didn't place a lot of value in my future.
After that key moment where you just gave up on God, you prayed to him and you didn't get what you wanted. What happened after that?
Yeah, so that time, after that moment of really kind of throwing out God and not thinking that he existed, and if he did, then he was just a big jerk that didn't listen to me, my life had much darkness in it. It was already beginning, but that kind of was the last page of like, all right, forget it, then that's not even possible. And a lot of despair entered into my life, and a lot of destructive behaviors that led to confusion and even not seeing the value of my life or the future, and thoughts of suicide, and just thinking that the plans and the goodness I thought my life could have was just not possible anymore.
But hang on a second, Michelle. In the scene that you were in, the situation that you were living, you couldn't talk to someone, or you didn't want to confide in anybody? I mean, you were a teenager, you had to talk about these things with somebody. You didn't have anybody, an adult, that you could trust in?
So in those 2 years of kind of darkness in my life, I remember I had this deep desire to be loved and to be known and like walked with in my suffering, and I felt like no one could do that for me. I wasn't open to really like God being a part of that picture, but I remember having this hunger for love and it not being kind of satisfied in anything that friends or family could offer, but as well as like the world. And what the world offered was, you know, drinking or drugs or things that would make you feel better, and those things ultimately fell short and only made me hungry for more. And so it wasn't until my junior year of high school when things started to change a little bit for me.
What happened during your junior year in high school?
So my life really changed my junior year of high school. Were those kind of years of darkness and choosing sin and not really seeing any hope or a future that would really satisfy like the longings of my heart. I met this lady, Dana, who had the same illness that I had, and she was a very strong non-denominational Christian. And she was meeting with me to just introduce me to kind of like nutrition and healthy lifestyle to try to help somehow to reboost my immune system and make me feel a little bit better as far as like health-wise. And it was amazing. These 4 months I met up with her, she was really loving, and I was a very like bitter teenager. And no matter like how snotty I was, like she was totally like loving to me and kind and just believed in me. And I would always ask her, like, how are you happy? 'Cause she was a very joyful person, but she still had a lot of illness and suffering. And so I'd ask her, like, how are you happy? Like, her life to me, it sucks. Like, she can't do what she wants to do. She has all these limitations, and you're smiling all the time. It's pissing me off, basically. You know, like, how are you happy? And she would always tell me it's my faith in Jesus. And the first time I heard that, I remember being like, okay, I'm gonna go throw up, because you just totally wrote me off as if Jesus has anything to do with my happiness. And I remember leaving and being so frustrated, like, Jesus, right, thank you. Like, I didn't understand what she was talking about at all. But over those next 4 months, I really got to know her and trusted her. And her response was always the same. I would ask her, like, how are you happy? Like, no, really, how are you happy? Like, waiting for her to tell me something else or tell me something real, you know? And she would always tell me it was Jesus that made her happy and that gave her joy and meaning. And I think she just kind of like wore me down by her love and her consistency, that she ended up inviting me to this non-denominational church. And I was open somehow to go and experience this church that she was involved in. And it was really a grace from God, because that night that I went, it was the first time I heard praise and worship, and first time I was in like a church setting like that, and I was like freaking out inside. I remember like walking in, everyone's like smiling and friendly. I'm like, oh my gosh, why am I here? Like, you gotta be kidding me. But I went with her, and the the pastor that night, it was, again, a grace from God, because everything that he spoke of that night, it was like for me in my situation. And he hit on a lot of the misconceptions I had about Christianity. And some main ones were about God's love for me, that, I had a little bit of Catholicism in my background, so I knew like the rules of the faith, and I knew that I broke them. And so for me, I thought that God was pretty pissed, if anything. Like, why would he want to talk to me, even if he might be real? Because I'm pretty sure I broke like what he wanted. And so my understanding of him was like, it's already done. Like, if he did want me, it's not anymore. And so that pastor that night really cleared up God's merciful and like love for me, like, and where I was at. That it was his love that was, like, he wasn't looking at my list of sins, but he was looking at my great potential and saw my goodness and knew my sorrow too. And that he wanted to walk with me. And that was a huge truth that awakened my heart to trust him. And the other one was that, so not only about God's mercy, but God wanted a unique and personal relationship with me. I never really heard about like a personal relationship with Jesus before that night. And that invitation was something first I didn't think Jesus was real. And so he helped me to see like the life of Christ was something like living and active now. And that relationship that Jesus wanted with me was personal and unique to me. And that he loved me for who I was, not the things I did wrong or the things I would do right. And that night, hearing for the first time, I think, the gospel and feeling in my heart this tug of like, if this is true, like, I'd be a fool not to want it. And I remember making that prayer, like, okay, like, Jesus, if you're real, like, I invite you into my life, and I want what you're offering, which is, it was hope, and it was a love that would truly understand me. And so that night they did an altar call, and I don't know how, but I went up there and I was bawling my eyes out. But I said yes to Jesus being like my personal Lord and Savior that night and wanting change. And that really, it was a moment of grace and of the Holy Spirit really acting upon me that night, because things started to change after that, where like the eyes of faith were given to me, and this renewed hope and this belief that God loved me became real. And that was for sure a miracle, because at that point in my life, I kind of just sold into a lie that like no one loved me, and there's just really hopeless, and I didn't love myself either at the time. And to believe like sincerely that God loved me it kind of like made me come to life again in a new way. And that set me out on a journey of just rediscovering first just a Christian faith and the understanding of who Jesus is and who I am, and then much later into the Catholic faith.
You said that after this initial grace, you set out on a journey. What were the first steps that you took on that journey? Did it involve the sacraments?
So right after this initial encounter with God's love and coming to know like that Jesus was real, holy crap, like all this stuff is real. I had Catholicism in my background from growing up, so a lot of the things I knew of the faith started to come to life in a new way. But for about 2.5 years, I was in this non-denominational church, just trying to understand like what it meant to follow Jesus. And my first steps after that night was, number one, I knew all the sin. I didn't know all the sin. I knew the big main things that were bringing about destruction and hopelessness in my life that I needed to get rid of. And so right away I knew there's just choices that I needed to make with particular friends and like habits that were not bringing, that were not going to allow me to like live this life for Christ in a new way. And also there's particular like thoughts about myself and about my life that were bringing me down that I knew were not necessarily like, that's not the way Jesus is starting to speak to me. So I knew that there's a difference in what was going on in my heart. And so those were the initial steps, and scripture was a huge thing for me in the beginning, because I remember they handed me a Bible and I was like, what do I do with this thing, The Bible scared me because it was really big, and a lot of the stories I heard when I was younger, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't want to read this. But I started to read the Gospels, and that was the first thing that really awakened this faith in me and helped me to know that Jesus was real, that he was not just this person that lived long ago that I thought about and I wrote off in the beginning, but someone real and active in my life like today. And that was a huge new beginning, and coming to know that he wanted to be my friend and to be the one that I could trust.
So you could say that they were your initial steps in the faith.
Yeah, that was my initial conversion, and then I came back in the Catholic faith when I was in college.
So what happened in college? You were growing in your faith in God, But what made you come back to the Catholic faith?
So after this initial encounter with God's love, for 2.5 years I lived non-denominational Christian. And looking back, for me, it was more like I lived Christianity my way, like however I thought it worked for me, which didn't get me very far, because it was taking pieces of what I knew about the faith, and I would leave the rest if it made me too uncomfortable. And I didn't come back into the Catholic faith until college, when I went away for school, and then kind of that mid-semester break and Christmas is when I went home. And right before then, I made kind of some mistakes when I was at school that were bringing me back into my old lifestyle. And I came to a place of recognizing like kind of the misery starting again, and also like the tug of war in my heart of, should I do this, should I not do this? And being at college in a new environment, new friends, I made some poor choices that put me in that position of like, okay, who am I? Like, am I following Jesus or am I not? I know what these particular things lead to. So it's kind of like a moment of making another decision, like if I'm gonna follow Jesus or not. And at that point, I went home for Christmas break, and this friend of mine that went to this non-denominational church, he called me and asked me like 21 questions about the Catholic faith, because his mom was coming into the Catholic faith that Easter. And he knew I had Catholic school in my background somewhere, and for some reason thought I would know everything about Catholicism, which is hilarious. So he called me, asked me those questions, and I felt like an idiot. So I was like, nope, I don't know about confession. He was asking me about Mass and the saints and Mary, and I was like, dude, I'm Christian, straight up Christian, I'm not Catholic. And so he was so good at asking all these questions, and it frustrated me. So when I got off the phone with him, I was like, I'm an idiot. How did I go to Catholic school for all these years and I don't have an answer for him at all? And he was a very strong Christian, so he was like on me about all these questions, and I was like, this is ridiculous. So although my intention wasn't the best, because it was definitely pride, that I was like, fine, I'm gonna find out your answers and I'll get back at you. It sent me on this journey of like, okay, I have to know the whys of some of this stuff because I have this in my background. So I ended up looking online, as well as like books that are around the house about Catholicism. And at that point, I never looked at the Catholic faith before, because to me, I was still like in a very like superficial place in my faith. I knew Jesus, I loved him, I wanted to follow him, and he changed my life. But I just didn't know how to like live the gospel out in its entirety. So it really was like Christianity my way, according to how I wanted it. And this place of rediscovering the Catholic faith through books and through reading stuff online and really answering his questions, it met two questions that I had when I went home that Christmas break, which were, first off, I knew I needed healing. Like, I'm trying to live for Jesus, but yet I feel like my desires aren't following all the time, and that I just needed some healing, like in my heart and in my mind, the way I think about things. And I also knew that I didn't have all of what I needed to actually like live out the faith and to allow the whole of my life to be transformed. So those things were already on my heart. And so his questions prompted this search for more in the Catholic faith. What I was discovering was like the beauty of the sacraments, the Mass, the lives of the saints were so impactful for me, and the Church Fathers. And I could not believe what I was reading. Like the first time, believing in Jesus, having a relationship with him, and I was reading stuff Catholic, and I was like, oh my gosh, this makes sense for the first time in my life. And I got really hungry to know more. And so that time during winter break, by the end of it, I made the decision that if I was going to be Christian my life long, that I needed to be Catholic, because I needed the riches that the church offered. I needed like everything. Like, I'm not going to leave anything out. So I went back to school the next semester for college and got involved in campus ministry, and just made the commitment of wanting to allow the sacraments and the things of the church to really have an impact in my life. And so when I started out, though, I was definitely like freaking out a little bit, because I was learning about confession and its power and the sacraments and the Mass, and it was a really beautiful time, but it was also like kind of scary, because here I am like hungering for healing and hungering for more, and then I received it, but I was kind of afraid to approach it, because it was, for me, like it was an answer to what I was asking for, but it was also, it was very difficult. Like going to confession for the first time, I wanted what was offered, but I was like, I don't want to say all my sins. Like, you gotta be kidding me. Like, but it was actually exactly what I needed, because some of them were like kind of coming back and like haunting, as far as like in my heart. Like the enemy was trying to make me look at what I've done in the past. And so hearing about confession and learning about it, it was a sure way of putting it to rest and being like, you know what? I can start fresh and I can believe in it. Like knowing that God has forgiven me, and I can move on with even more energy and confidence in God's power of mercy. And so confession was huge for me in the beginning. The Mass, and recognizing that there's so much in the Mass that I just didn't understand, and the more I read about it, the more I entered more deeply into what I went to for so long when I was younger.
What would you say to the young people who are watching us right now and are maybe living in a situation very much like you were, and they think that they can't get out of it? They don't want to hear about the faith because they think that that's not going to do anything for them. What would you say to them?
My encouragement to young people that might be watching this video and maybe in a similar situation, or maybe are even in a place in their faith that they're not sure if Catholicism is what they need to really grow. My encouragement would be that from my own experience, the best way to live is to be Catholic and to allow the riches of the Church to really have a beautiful impact on who they are, as well as the great adventure that God wants to take them on in their life. And I know for myself, the Catholic faith and its beauty at first was very intimidating because it's so huge, but I realized that I have my whole life to really dive into the richness of the Church and to understand it all, and that it's not something I'll ever get bored with, but it's part of God's adventure for me to discover more and more of who He is and also who I am. And also I would encourage them to look at the teachings of John Paul II for the theology of the body. For myself, that was a huge way that I saw the beauty and also the road of healing that God was inviting me into, to really discover the beauty of who I am as a woman and the goodness of my femininity, as well as just my identity as being His daughter first. The core of who I am is to be His daughter. And I can know deeply that I'm loved and that I'm beautiful and that He has a plan for me that I can trust. So those teachings helped me to really see that, and also know that God will transform my mind, my heart, to see the world through His eyes. Because the more I learned about the faith and the saints and even the teachings of John Paul II in the theology of the body, I was like, this is so beautiful, but this is not how I see things. I don't see men this way, or I don't see myself this way. And beginning to see that the truth is not there to condemn me or to show me how far I'm off or how far I suck, but the truth is there to hold out what God can do and its greatness if I let Him, if I let Him transform my mind and my heart to go to those places that are maybe filled with darkness or sin of the past or of the present, whatever it is. But if I let God's light shine there, that His light always wins over the darkness, and that He can transform my eyes to see the world through the beauty in which He's created it. And I don't have to be afraid of that, but I just have to be open and raw and ask Him to give me it all and to not leave anything unturned. And so really those teachings help to give confidence that God's showing me this and allowing me to see the beauty, because He can do that in me. I can't do that for myself. I can't convince myself that I'm amazing and that I'm beautiful or I'm worthy of it. I did the opposite in my life. I convinced myself that I was worthless and that the things I did or things that happened to me that showed I didn't have dignity or whatever. But God is the one that convinced me of my greatness and of my beauty. And it's because I'm made in His image, and He's the one that can put my heart back together and help me see things through His lens, so I don't shortchange myself or give myself a life that's boring or dull, that allow His grand adventure for me to really come true.
Michelle, thank you so much for joining us on our program today. I'm sure your testimony is going to help a lot of young people. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy.
Thank you. It's so great to know that you are loved. To know that you are loved and are never alone. Because you know that God is always with you. To know that you are a child, somebody's daughter, God's daughter. You're never going to be alone. So know that you are a son or daughter of God, and know that you are loved. Thank you for joining us.